Seahawk fighter jet. Back in 1964, a Seahawk fighter jet crashed into the ocean. The aircraft had apparently been hijacked by a young maintenance worker who wished to be a pilot but had been rejected by the Air Force. So he became an ordnance mechanic instead. Then one Sunday morning, he climbed into the cockpit of a Seahawk, started the engine, took her up into the air, then crashed it into the Bay of Bengal. Luckily, the pilot was rescued by a local fisherman. However, the aircraft was never recovered. It sat at the bottom of the bay for around 40 years. Even though all the locals knew where it was, nobody had any interest in retrieving the aircraft from the muck. It was not until 2010 that divers went down to see the vehicle for the very first time. And yes, it was sitting spookily at the bottom of the bay, surrounded by fish and mud. The Seahawk was never pulled out of the water, but divers did find its remains, which is good enough for some people. As for the ordnance mechanic who allegedly stole and crashed the plane in the first place, he was sentenced to 2 years imprisonment and later fled India for Canada. The Yonaguni Pyramid. Off the coast of Japan, there's a giant rock formation and nobody knows what it is. The Yonaguni Pyramid is undoubtedly the most mysterious object ever found underwater. It was first spotted by divers in 1987, and you can very clearly see from any angle that the Yonaguni Pyramid must have been made by human hands. It clearly has levels, steps, and smooth sides that could only have been done by a being with technology. And despite its discovery in the 80s, the government of Japan continues to deny that this underwater oddity has anything to do with history or archaeology. Basically, nobody in any official capacity wants to talk about the pyramid, suggesting that there could be something spooky going on. Even though most researchers believe the ruins date back to at least 5,000 years ago and were at least manipulated somewhat by human hands, officials continue to ignore it. But it's getting harder to ignore. There is ample evidence that the Yonaguni Pyramid was crafted by humans. For example, there was a triangular depression found in the monument that had 2 holes beside it, which led researchers to believe that there was an attempt to separate the rock by using wedges. So somebody obviously had a hand in crafting this bizarre underwater spectacle, and despite everything, the Japanese Agency for Cultural Affairs and the government of the Okinawa Prefecture have denied the pyramid as an important historical artifact. What are they trying to hide? New blob species. Let's move from stone to life. In 2020, scientists from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration formally identified a new species of creature for the very first time based only on video footage taken from the bottom of the ocean. And what a creature it is. It's a strange gelatinous blob known as Duobrachium sparksae, and it looks like something that should be floating around in outer space. This blob is a species of ctenophore, and it was captured on video by a remotely operated vehicle near the coast of Puerto Rico. The strange blob was found about 2.5 miles beneath the surface, and while claiming a new species based on nothing but video evidence is preposterous and unheard of, they actually managed to get away with it this time because the creature was so uniquely strange. No other living thing on Earth has 2 long tentacles and a body that's basically just a transparent balloon. According to one of the oceanographers who worked on the project, the organism is beautiful and unique. It moves like a hot air balloon slowly over the sea floor, using its 2 tentacles like anchors. It maintains a very specific altitude while floating. However, researchers are not sure if it's actually anchored to the seabed, and even though the blob looks like a jellyfish, it's actually a completely different organism. Apollo rocket engines. Imagine coming across a space rocket stuck in the sand at the bottom of the ocean. You would immediately think extraterrestrial spaceship. But of course, this story is about the Apollo moon rocket engines that were raised from the bottom of the sea by the ridiculously rich CEO of Amazon, Jeff Bezos. What's really interesting about the Apollo rocket engines is that everyone had thought they were lost forever. They were the huge engines that launched the astronauts to the moon around 50 years ago, but it took a private expedition led by the founder of an internet company to find them. So good job to the government on this one. These rockets were originally used in the 60s and 70s to send missions from Earth into orbit and to the moon. The mighty Saturn V rockets gave the space vessels a boost out of the atmosphere before plummeting down into the seafloor. According to Bezos himself, the Apollo rockets will be restored and then likely donated to the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum in Washington. It's a bit awkward because Bezos paid the money to find the rockets, bring them out of the ocean, and restore them, and yet NASA owns them. They kind of have to go with whatever the rich guy says in this case. Mysterious purple orb. Believe it or not, a mysterious purple disco ball has been discovered deep within the ocean. This is one of the most bizarre and mysterious discoveries of the last few years when it comes to blobs. This thing looked like a glowing blip on the screen. The small purple orb was originally found during an exploration of the Arguello Canyon deep inside the ocean. The orb was actually collected using a suction tool on the remotely operated vehicle Hercules, as none of the scientists could properly identify the orb. After all, it was sitting tucked under a rock shelf about 5,000 feet below the surface. At first glance, it almost appeared to be an alien homing beacon. But of course, it's probably a life form. Researchers first thought that it could be an unknown species of gastropod. However, once the scientists got the purple orb back on board their vessel, they could see that it was clearly not a gastropod. The orb unfolded into something that almost looked like a pair of lungs. According to the report from Live Science, researchers suspected that it was a pleurobranch or a type of mollusk. Whatever it was, this species was definitely unknown. In fact, the scientists were stumped over the identity of the purple blob. Nobody knew why it was glowing, why there was only one of them discovered in such a huge area, or if they would even find another one again. Alien squid. Blobs are interesting enough in their own way, but a recent image out of the Gulf of Mexico is so horrifying that it will literally scare the pants right off your legs. Lurking in the deep and gloomy depths is a species of something that looks like it's straight out of Stephen King's The Mist. This creature doesn't even look like it should be real. The footage of it was captured by a remotely operated vehicle being used by Shell Oil to study the water around its oil rigs. And that's exactly where this monstrous thing was found. It was filmed in the Perdido area of the Alaminos Canyon, where Shell Oil has a pretty heavy industrial influence. But what is this terrifying monster? And to answer what everyone's thinking, yes, it is real. It's actually known as a magna pinna squid, sometimes referred to as the long-armed squid. This is because it's roughly 26 feet in length and has extremely thin tentacles that are almost elastic, being roughly 20 times larger than the squid's actual body. These squids are so rare and so mystifying that not a single one has ever been physically captured or sampled. It actually took the video footage from Shell Oil to reveal the mystery of how this thing even moves. The rare sighting was at a depth of over 7,800 feet. That is pretty much at the bottom of the ocean. It goes to show that way down near the bottom of the sea are all kinds of horrifying monsters that we still probably have not identified. The long-armed squid was only first discovered in 1907, then documented on video for the first time in 1988. Mysterious underwater mine. Let's stop talking about horrifying sea monsters for a minute. Instead, let's find out what's going on with the strange and mysterious underwater mine recently located in the sprawling labyrinth of underwater caves along the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. It's true that these caves hold some of the most impressive archaeological relics anywhere on the planet. At least the artifacts that divers have uncovered from these underground tunnels have definitely been unique compared to anything else on Earth. But this newest discovery goes way back in time to the earliest prehistoric trace of humankind on the continent. A new study has unearthed the oldest known mine in the Americas. According to Science Alert, a subterranean ochre mine has been found that dates back to 12,000 years ago. An expert diver and micropaleontologist from McMaster University in Canada claims that the underwater caves are like a time capsule with clear evidence of ochre mining thousands of years ago. So what does that mean? And how does it fit in with the heaps of skeletal remains that have been found in nearby caverns that date back only a few thousand years? Well, scientists just don't know the answers yet. Evidence suggests that the submerged cave systems were only operational for about 2,000 years, so between 12,000 years ago and 10,000 years ago. Ancient people would have extracted the ochre, then just kind of gave up the cave and left. But scientists can't really say why. It could be that they moved on to other deposits, considering there are still hundreds and hundreds of miles of unexplored caves in the area. Or something else could have happened. Scientists just can't be sure. All they know is that the ochre pigment must have been incredibly important for ancient people to go through so much trouble of mining it. The longest animal ever. I know that I said enough of the sea monsters, but let's take a look at another sea monster, and believe me, this one is going to blow your mind. The world's longest animal has recently been discovered in the waters of Australia. That's right, it's the longest animal ever documented, and it's weirdly spooky. At first, it almost looks like some kind of alien string or something that fell off their spaceship. But according to scientists, it's actually a siphonophore, which is a deep-sea predator made up of multiple clones all acting together as one organism. This particular siphonophore 1964, measured an estimated 150 feet. That makes it the longest animal ever. It's about twice as long as any blue whale and at least 3 times longer than any humpback whale. It's also incredible and acts like a jellyfish in that it feeds by dangling thin tentacles into the water that can sting fish and crustaceans unlucky enough to swim beneath its curtain of stingers. This is not the kind of creature you want to be caught in the middle of. Imagine trying to swim through all those poisonous rings. The USS Oriskany. In the Pensacola Pass, deep in the spooky waters of the Gulf of Mexico, is the USS Oriskany. It's definitely one of the spookiest ghost ships beneath the water. It's also the world's largest artificial reef. It was once an aircraft carrier, but now sits 22 miles southeast of the Pensacola Pass, 212 feet beneath the ocean. The ship was commissioned near the end of World War II, but it never saw any action until Korea. Then, in 1963, JFK boarded the vessel to witness military operations, but alas, the ship did not prove very useful and it was eventually decommissioned in 1976. Then in 2006, they sunk the boat to make an artificial reef. Now it's one of the spookier places you can go diving off the coast of Florida. It's full of fish, it's full of history, and in the murky waters, it'll feel like you're exploring a sunken vessel from a bygone age. The Bloop. Not all the mysterious things found underwater are visible. For example, there is the mysterious bloop. It was a sound heard on hydrophones in 1997. To this day, nobody is sure what made this strange noise. It was extremely loud, delivered at an ultra-low frequency, and was heard at different listening stations underwater thousands of miles apart. It's one of the only truly baffling noises ever picked up by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Many scientists put forth their own theories in the years following 1997, saying the bloop could have been an unknown animal, but the truth is that nobody has ever solved this mystery. Also, the NOAA is fairly sure the sound was not made by a creature. Some think that it could have been the cracking of an ice shelf breaking off from Antarctica. In fact, a seismologist from the Oregon State University claims the bloop was indeed the sound of an ice quake. This guy also says that the idea of a giant animal being able to make a noise heard all across the Pacific Ocean was always more of a fantasy than a science. But just what does this guy think he knows? The sound could very well have been the yawn of Cthulhu or even the rousing of the old ones from deep beneath the earth. Which of these underwater discoveries was the most fascinating? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and thanks for watching. If you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe. See you again soon for another fun video.